Can you share some of the most common misconceptions families have about addiction and recovery?
Oh man, there's quite a few. This is a really good question. One of the biggest things that we see is typically the family doesn't understand the progressiveness of the disease, so they think it's more of a willpower, or they don't understand, and so they use. Well, I'll just speak from my understanding of myself. I used judgment and evaluation of behavior and tied the person to the behavior, as opposed to stating the behavior is something that is, I don't want to say incomprehensible, but it's like I'll hold them accountable to the behavior, but you love the person unconditionally, regardless of what their behavior is. And a lot of people struggle with that. They sync the two together. So willpower is typically one of the top issues we see is I don't understand why they just can't stop. So one of the best explanations that I heard, I remember a gentleman came in and we were just talking about the effects of use, and his drug of choice was heroin. And he said the reason why it's so tough, and he was a religious guy. He said, "Imagine this. Imagine that once you use, you feel like Jesus comes down and is hugging you and holding you. Like, why would you ever want to give that up?" And I never heard it that way before. That really changed the understanding that I had. And so hearing how much it hits the dopamine sensors and all these different emotions, that's the part that we're looking at. And that's the part that we go into the core issue, because when you have something that tied to emotion that the brain goes, I want more of this, that's where we got to do the work in order to attach pain eventually to this and pleasure over here of what we're looking for.
Mm. Okay. How can family members best support their loved ones while they are in treatment?
So the way family members can best support their loved one in treatment, there's two different ways. Number one is I tell families this because a lot of times there's so much wreckage, there's so much pain and frustration, and it might sound weird, but it's like you're gonna get your turn. But if you can write the things down, write the emotions and the feelings down that you want to go ahead and have the conversation with, because when a person is raw, they're not at a place they're able to hear that. And so especially early on in addiction or of treatment of addiction, is making sure that the person is working through their own issues. We'll always be able to bring up how they hurt, how they've negatively impacted the family. But if we bring it up too soon, it can really send the person back. So the reason why I say it this way is we created a family program about a year or two ago because we work a lot with the families, but I wanted to get something out that they're basically kind of going through family treatment while their loved one is with us. And it's a 6-week online course, self-paced, that helps take you through the different stages, what to look for, but it helps the family dynamic heal and learn how to have healthy communication. And here's the part that I love, is because it's not 100% success rate. Human beings have the free will choice. So some people come through our program and just flourish and build the most wonderful relationships, great businesses, they go on to enjoy life. But there are some people that don't apply what they learn. They get the education, but they miss out on the application and execution. With the families that go through the family program, they're able to heal and get healthier regardless if their loved one continues their journey or not. And so by understanding this aspect of getting educated, doing your work, so when the person is ready, you're able to have these difficult conversations that says what happened matters. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to start setting new and healthy boundaries of how to address this. Did that
Okay.
answer the question?
They did.
It's kind of all over the place.
No, that was great. All right. What are some common mistakes families make when trying to help someone in recovery?
There's a few that come to top of mind of the most common mistakes individual makes. First one is they don't know what to say, so they don't say anything, where they walk on eggshells. They start, unfortunately, enabling the behavior because they just don't know what to do. When they bring it up, it gets blown out of proportion. The loved one either gaslights them or starts going to these tangents of saying it's your fault and going to blame and shame and all these different things. So the first mistake is to not say anything. The second mistake, and this is going to confuse you possibly, is coming out and saying everything and just laying it all and getting so frustrated that now the emotions are so high that the rationalization and the logical part just shuts off. So there's this in between of having a conversation. So, number one, it is very difficult to have a conversation with your loved one when they're currently under the influence. The way I like to think of it is we go from logic to illogical behavior. The rationalization part is just shut off. So it's basically talking too crazy. The reason why I say this is because we want to wait until the person is either not under the influence or typically the next day, unless you're doing an intervention. If it's an intervention, then it's all bets are off. That's where we set the very clear line of this is what's going to happen if you want help, and we're here to support you and love you. And here's what's going to happen if you don't want help. We're still going to love you, but we're not going to support you. There's got to be consequences. So hopefully that kind of covers the spectrum.
Absolutely. All right. How can families rebuild trust after years of addiction related damage?
So trust is built through consistency. What I mean by that is the litmus test that we do here, and I help a lot of families work through, is to start watching at what they do, not what they say. So once a person starts building trust through consistency, meaning what they said they were going to do, they did by the time they said they're going to do it, every time without fail. That is a lot to ask in the beginning, but having this open dialogue of here's the expectations, as long as you meet the expectations, we start earning a little bit more trust. And so it really varies from family to family. One of the things we talk about in our online family program is getting very clear, actually in writing down an agreement of what trust looks like and what are the steps to take to get there. So here's an example. So if you're helping, like I know we've had a few families that will help with rent. And so very clearly, and the time to do this is when everybody's calm and sitting down, and that's where we come up with the agreement. And the agreement was, as long as you continue to work 40 hours a week, which is full time, we will continue to cover the rent for you. And so as they continued of having those conversations and they continued to work full time, they were there to help. They were building trust back. Now, what happens is if a person gets fired or quits or stops showing up to work, that's where it's very clearly defined. You didn't meet this criteria for this, so we're no longer going to help financially, but we're never going to withhold the love. We are always here to love you. We just will not enable this behavior. And that's why in writing, crystal clear, the saying I like is to be unclear is to be unkind. By getting it on paper where everybody is aware of what's expected, what's tolerated, what happens once the agreement is broken, it just makes it so much easier when the emotions do come up.
Hmm. All right. What role does family play in long term recovery, and how can they set healthy boundaries?
Oh, I love so first of all, one of the best definitions I've ever heard of addiction is isolation. So anytime that there's pain in the family dynamic, natural tendency is to pull back and withhold because we got hurt. So the importance of having community within the environment, the family dynamic, they're supporting the more family. Let me just put it this way. The more the family's there to support the individual, the better the odds and probability of long-term recovery, because it takes all these different aspects to help that individual heal. One of the biggest problems is the guilt and the shame that the person who's been struggling with the addiction is feeling. I mean, think about it. You get exposed of your worst moments you've ever lived, the things that you've kept hidden in the closet. You don't want anybody to know. Now, not only is it out in the open, but it's how people actually see you and view you. This is the part that gets so difficult to comprehend, because this is what happens when a person says, I don't want to live this way anymore. And we practice living by truth. So, of loving everything, even the most horrific things, doesn't mean you have to accept it or say, I say that this is acceptable. It's, I love you knowing all this. Now we're coming together to set some healthy boundaries and parameters of what we're going to do to continue forward. So this is why you'll hear me say it again and again and again. You never withhold the love, but you can set boundaries of the other help that you're going to do, such as financial help, whatever that looks like. But that love, I tell people, I will love you unconditionally. I will never withhold my love. However, for us to spend time together, to communicate, for me to come over, or for me to invite you into our house, there are some expectations. So I hope that kind of clarifies the difference.
Absolutely. Okay. How should family members handle relapses, and what steps can they take to encourage continued recovery?
So, relapse is such a slippery slope. One of the sayings that I actually do not like at all, it pisses me off, is when people will say, well, relapsing is part of the program. It does not have to be. In fact, one of the things is once you make the decision to start moving forward, it never has to be. And this is why recovery is such a beautiful thing. I say it's a slippery slope because what happens if someone just relapsed? It's not a thing of like, oh, you'll never get it then. So, what I like to say is if it's in the past, then it's part of your plan, not part of your plan, but it's part of your experience. If it's coming up in the future, it doesn't have to be. So, as far as relapse, when a person is living in truth, living by the five foundational freedoms, is doing the daily disciplines, this is how we grow. As they do that, they start building trust. Then I don't I don't want to say then there's no chance of relapse, but what we found is when the person's doing the daily work, the chances of relapse diminish more and more and more because they're doing the daily work. If they stop doing the work that gets the results, then they go back to getting the results from or the results that were happening before not doing the work. I hope that makes sense. So, what was the second part of the question?
And what steps can they take to encourage continued recovery?
So there's a few things from a data standpoint. So a lot of the families will recommend when the person returns home or is coming back, is it's a thing where both have to be on the same page, but of weekly testing. So the fastest way to earn trust back is to show through behavior. I will test at any day, at any time, because I'm living a certain way that I don't have to be concerned about having a positive test. So we look at the data. We also look at the daily conversations and living openly. So here's what I mean by that. As we continue to progress forward, we have this relationship, we're very open, everything checks out. I call it the BS detector. You don't really sense anything. Now, if things start happening, oh, I got a flat tire, well, this happened, and you start seeing a pattern start to reveal itself again, if your little BS detector goes off, this is the part where have that confrontational, we call it compassionate confrontation. We go over this in our 6-week family program, but it's how to have those uncomfortable conversations where there's going to be some collision, but done in a healthy way. Because when we avoid those difficult conversations, all it does is delay or prolong the amount of pain and usually consequences on the back end.
Perfect. All right. So, what are the best ways to cope with the fear and anxiety that comes with having a loved one in treatment?
One of the best ways to cope is to have those open conversations. Unfortunately, it's human nature when we get hurt, we want to close down, and it's a defense mechanism to keep us in the illusion of I'm protected. So by having those uncomfortable conversations, it allows us to explore together. So I'm sure there's a psychobabble term for it. I don't know what to call it. I call it external processing. What I've learned is when I start thinking out loud and kind of inviting a person into my thought process and we stumble through it together, there's a lot of grace and there's there's room for open interpretation, but it's a dialogue. So here's what I mean by that. So if I'm hesitant because of something that happened in the past, I don't want to just think of that and then project it on them. I want to be able to say, I notice I'm feeling a little bit of hesitation right now. And as I'm thinking this through, I'm noticing that I'm still pulling some of the things from the past to the present. And so let's have a conversation because I'm afraid. I'm noticing that I have fear because what happened in the past might happen again in the future. And I just want to have a dialogue with you. Where are you with that? Do you have this concern? And then when I can create a safe enough space that we're exploring together instead of, I can't ever trust you again because of what you did. Think about it. If there's blame, that triggers the guilt and the shame. That's where we live in a reactionary place. And I've never seen reactionary move to something positive. So that's why I love this concept of external processing to fumble through. So it's kind of like there's nothing off limits because we're exploring together. And then that's where if something does start to get a little bit triggered, we can always say, okay, this seems like a hot topic or a hot button. Let's write it down. Let's take a few minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, and then let's come back to visit this. Now, I've been taught this my entire life, never understood why, so I didn't do it. Until one time a therapist sat down and said, do you know why we say wait 10 to 12 minutes. When you feel your emotions shoot up, you got to take a step back. The reason why is it's just science. So the prefrontal cortex of the brain, this is where the rationalization, the logic happens, the problem solving. What happens is when we get triggered, the reptilian part of the brain, what happens is the blood leaves the prefrontal cortex, goes to the reptilian part, and it actually goes to your hands and your legs, because it's why we're still here. It's, I'm triggered, it's fight or flight. I'm about to die or I have to kill. That is the unconscious part. So when I recognize that, so if I'm getting in a heated debate, that part's been triggered, the logical part of the brain shuts down. So after 10 to 15 minutes, the blood goes back to the prefrontal cortex. Now we can look at it from a different perspective, a different angle. And actually, I believe, I don't know what week it is, but it's in the family program online. I actually run you through, it's called the heart math process. It's where you sync your heart to your brain. And studies have shown, so EKG is the heart, EEG is the brain waves. When you hook them up to the same person, they're all over the place. But there's actually something called heart math. Dr. Childre is the one who actually discovered this, that through breathing through 2 to 4 minutes, it's called heart syncing, they actually come together. And the reason why that's important is because when they're in harmony, you are in this place of syncing your heart to your mind. That reptilian part of the brain, the fight or flight, isn't active anymore. And now we're in this place of actually problem solving. So it's a wonderful exercise when you find yourself triggered to get back to, that leads to massive improvement, communication, and connection.
Wonderful. How can families address enabling behaviors and shift towards healthier support?
So this one can be a tough one, of because nobody loves saying, hey, I am enabling. And a lot of times we're not even sure of what enabling is. So a very archaic definition of enabling is either promoting or supporting any type of behavior that is damaging the relationship. So here's what I mean by that is, this actually just happened not too long ago. A person was still in their active addiction. And so the family continued to provide groceries and food because the mom, loving and coming from such a wonderful place in the heart, said, I don't want my son to starve. Unfortunately, what this does is it negatively reinforces they can continue to use because their basic human needs will still be taken care of. And so what happens is the parents or the family typically continue to take on the consequences because they were fighting for every dollar. And so resentment started to build of, I'm spending money on food for them. They're not contributing. I'm trying to take care of the kids. And so that type of enabling, even though it sounds like it's coming from a loving place, which it is, it continues to reinforce that behavior. So when we say, how do we make sure we're not enabling? And what I'm about to do, is this going to continue to support their using? And if it's a yes, so that's where for phone calls or stopping by to say hi and to give them a hug and say, I love you so much. But then we also got to let them know, I'm hurting seeing you like this. I miss getting to connect with you. I want to have conversations where I feel seen and heard. Notice I'm not saying you don't see me. You're not listening. When I can change it to I, this helps eliminate the enabling, and I'm still able to speak my true authentic self of what I'm feeling and what it is that I'm needing.
All right. What kind of self-care should family members prioritize while their loved one is still in treatment?
So when I first wrote this book, The Recovery Way, initially it was for the person who's struggling with the sedation, the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the gambling, whatever it is. What I found is more and more families started reading this, and I've gotten emails and texts and conversations of individuals saying, I had no idea this is what was going on in their mind, of what they were thinking and feeling. And it was actually kind of cool of getting that side from the family. So say the question again.
Are there specific, what kind of self-care should family members prioritize while their loved one is still in treatment?
So the self-care is in here as well. We call it the first fruits or the 5 to thrive. The way I like to explain it is like this. Anytime you're flying somewhere, they always come on before you take off and say, look, if anything happens up in the air, oxygen mask drops down, secure it on yourself first before you try to go ahead and take care of your family. The reason why is because if I'm trying to take care of other people and not myself, there's asphyxiation. There's only a limited amount of oxygen up there, and now I can't help anybody. So this is why I call this healthy selfish. So the first thing is make sure you've got a morning ritual or a morning routine that deals with the 5 foundational freedoms. So something in fitness, to move, to sweat. This helps regulate the brain chemistry. It feels so much better too. And it actually increases my capacity to take on more of the crap that life throws at us. Next is faith, creating space and solitude, some quiet time of actually sitting in quiet contemplation. Third is family and friends, of doing daily deposits, of letting people know what I think about them, of I love, I honor, I appreciate, I respect, a memory from the past. This is where a lot of the times, so we talk with the loved ones here and encourage them to do that, but also with the family, do the same thing, is just shoot off either little handwritten notes, taking pictures. You can do picture postcards, but they're one-way deposits of letting a person know, I'm thinking about you. I remember this when we were kids. This is a great memory. So that's the family and friends, of pouring into your relationships. Finances is a big one, of continuing to either read or study or learn or school, but something that will help you continue to expand the value that we all provide here. And then last but not least is the fifth foundation, which it all sits on. That's the foundation of feelings, is making sure that you're doing some feeling work. So we actually created an app called the Recovery Chat that actually runs through a journaled prompt to help change perspective. It retrains and rewires the brain to look at different stimuluses and then breaks down basically a lesson. That's just a fancy way for saying, just write down what you're feeling, your thoughts. And as you get that out, it takes the war that's going on up here and puts it down on paper. And it really, really helps. So for self-care, those are the 5 to thrive that we look for, that we see wonderful results of. Healthy selfish, taking care of our own mental health, so we have more to give to others.
Hmm. Are there specific resources, books, or support groups you recommend for families?
Yes, there are a lot of different books and resources in the family program. Every single week, I think we recommend anywhere from 1 to 2 books that actually reinforce all the training. So like, I know on boundaries, I think one of the books is called Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. We have another one for communication, healthy communication. And so I don't have those books memorized, but out of the 6-week course, I think we recommend there's 10 to 12 books that are great, great reads. They're the best of the best. I've read through so many different books, and those are the ones that seem to help the best on those specific targets of area.
Okay. What are the signs that a loved one is truly committed to their recovery versus just going through the motions?
So I remember when I was in college, I worked for this manager, and he had this saying that always resonated with me. He would say, "Bring it, don't sing it." So everyone would go around talking about what they were going to do, but very few actually did what they did, and whether they talked about it or not was irrelevant. So here's how this is going to benefit you. Look at the action and the behavior, not what they're saying or what their intentions are. As we start behaving differently, this is how we're able to rebuild the trust, and that's what we go off of is action.
Understanding addiction and maintaining sobriety questions. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about addiction and recovery?
Oh, this is going to piss some people off. Some of the biggest misconceptions of addiction is the disease model, that you are born with it and there's nothing you can do to overcome it, and it's kind of it's kind of like you're a victim of it. Now, there's been a lot of studies that support it. There's been a lot of studies that actually debunk it. There's this wonderful book, I remember reading it a long time ago. It was made in the 70s, but it's called Lying by Statistics. And it's actually how they can take studies and argue both sides, manipulating the statistics, that the data for their own side. So the reason why I say it is because there's a wonderful book called The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton. And he comes in to say, okay, what is it? Is it nature or nurture? Because that's the time-old question. So there are some genetic parts, and I'm going to kind of speak just a bit more opinion from what I've seen doing this for multiple decades, working with thousands and thousands of individuals. I've seen both. Now, I've seen genetic dispositions that allows a person to maybe go off a little bit more in a certain direction or be more intrigued by certain behaviors or emotions. But here's a beautiful thing about recovery. Even those with this genetic part, they say nurture is even more powerful than nature, more powerful than genetics. So this is what gives us hope in recovery is whether you're born with it or it's a progressive disease, it gets worse and worse, through coming over here and looking at environment, daily disciplines, the actual work that we're doing, the growth work, this is how we're able to heal and grow and eventually go on to live the most amazing lives. So I know it's kind of a politically correct answer of like, well, both are right, but my main thing that I want the viewers to take away from this is if I'm using either one as a crutch or an excuse, I want to go to the other side and look at that to remove myself from the victim mindset and start moving towards kind of the pursuer or the actual doer to overcome.
All right. How does addiction affect the brain, and why is it so difficult to break the cycle?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a neuroscientist. So there's so many people that that dwarf me that actually are neuroscience scientists and doctors and can go into that. From what I've seen and just kind of dumbed down to a way that I would understand is the way it affects the brain is it hijacks certain parts that continue to release the feel-good chemicals. So think of it this way. If I found a way to numb the pain, so the way that we act as human beings is we do whatever we can to avoid pain while we're seeking pleasure. Different stimuluses or different addictive drugs or alcohol, what they do is they actually numb the pain. So right away the brain goes, oh, when I engage in this, I don't feel the pain and it's pleasurable. So when you do that enough times, you actually condition the brain. I don't ever have to deal with pain. I can continue to deal with this pleasure. And that's the actual, I'll say, chemical part that we've seen that gets so difficult to create enough of a gap or a space to start doing the work. The reason why this is important is because if I continually condition sedating to pain, it's how the brain says, anytime there's pain or discomfort, this is what we're going to do. It's like playing Monopoly and you roll, go to jail. It's like you do not pass go, you do not collect $200, you go straight to jail. The brain says, we're not going to do anything else other than give me this because this is what I need. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. How important is addressing trauma in addiction recovery, and what role does it play?
Well, trauma for a lot of individuals is the key component that stokes the addiction. Anytime I have had a traumatic experience in my life and I have not processed or worked through that, anything that triggers that off, that reptilian part of the brain says, I'm about to die, fight or flight. How do we numb the pain and how do we seek this pleasure? So the reason why this is important is because, again, if I condition my brain this way, I don't ever have to go through and actually process or even evaluate the trauma. I don't have to do the work. And this is the part that's so tough because most traumatic experiences in the first stages, we somehow think it's our fault. And that's so much pain to take on. So what we do instead is we continue to relive the traumatic experience or experiences and take what's in the past and bring it to the present. And this is what continually creates the pain and that actually fuels the addiction. So this is why the first step is to take enough time off of the drugs or alcohol, and then through, like what we do here is we have amazing therapists, we have a psychiatrist that really knows medication incredibly well, and it's a whole approach that they come together for a wholeness to really address what's going on so the individual can deal with the trauma, to be able to work with it and through it so they can go on to live healthier lives.
Wonderful. What are the key factors that determine whether someone stays sober after treatment?
It's going to sound super simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Doing the daily work. So one of the analogies I like using with a lot of the guys is, and I think it's a very great direct correlation to recovery. Imagine not showing up to work for 30 days, and then on payday you show up and tell your boss, I'm here for my paycheck. When I tell the guys this so often, they just kind of laugh. I'm like, what would happen if you didn't work for a whole month and then you show up saying, I have an expectation to be paid for a month. What would your boss say? Every single time they kind of laugh, like, oh, they'd say, beat it. Recovery is the same way. If I'm not doing the daily work and I'm expecting the payment, if I'm expecting the result, now in the real world here with payment, it's so obvious. We want to take that to the realm of recovery. And when I say doing the daily work, this is where the 5 foundational freedoms came from, of doing the 5 to thrive, looking for the perfect 10, which the vernacular is in here, but it's doing the daily work, making sure that you are addressing every area of your life and just doing those small little daily steps every single day. And then you get the fruit, you get the result. Now, the sad thing is if you don't do it a day, it doesn't mean all of a sudden you go back and revert. But here's where we see people struggle. They don't do it one day and they go, see, I'm still fine. And then one day turns into 3 or 4, sometimes a week, and they go, I'm still fine. I don't need to do the work. The problem is we get so far away from the work that eventually we no longer get the results.
How does community and connection impact a person's ability to maintain long-term sobriety?
So one of my favorite definitions of addiction is isolation. Anytime we're looking at a definition, we can look at the antonym, just the opposite. If isolation is addiction, that means connection is recovery. When we understand that, this is why now there's camps that love AA, there's camps that hate AA. Regardless of where you stand in that, one of the primary principles is community and actually having a mentor. They call it a sponsor, someone there for accountability, but also for guidance. So connection and community is one of the most powerful and potent things needed. Not necessarily desired, not would be nice, needed for ongoing recovery. The reason why is if we go back, so we're still kind of new with being industrialized as human beings. If we look back at all the hundreds of thousands of years, we've always been in tribes. That means community, that means connection. If we weren't in community or connection, they would actually kick someone out if they did something irreprehensible. This person would die. That part of the brain still says, so anytime we're rejected from community, from connection, that part of the brain goes, I'm gonna die, and that's what triggers. I'm not saying it's a valid excuse, but I want you to understand, this is the part that triggers the brain that we're not aware of. This is on the unconscious. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, I might as well sedate because the tribe just kicked me out. So we wanna have accountability, we wanna have boundaries, but that connection and community is so important when it comes to long-term recovery.
Agreed. What advice do you have for someone struggling with the fear of failure in recovery?
The fear of failure in recovery. So first we have to define what failure is to you. One of the biggest issues that I have struggled with, and I still do from time to time, is that I have the wrong definition of failure. And again, this is going back to that reptilian part of the brain, and this is at an unconscious level. When we perceive failure, that triggers the part of the brain of, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna get disowned from the tribe. I'm gonna get kicked out. And that's the part that looks for anything to numb the pain, to sedate away from what's going on. As I understand this, now I can change the definition of failure, because really failure is simply feedback. So it depends what the context is of what the person's saying as failure. But if I engage in a behavior and I get a negative feedback reinforcement loop, that's where it just simply means, oh, this is enough information that I'm going to want to change the behavior. Then we can go back to it. And if I go and I get negative feedback for that behavior, all that is feedback. This is feedback. This behavior creates pain. Eventually, we start finding behavior that actually creates a lot of pleasure and where we enjoy things in life. And this is where, again, using this, we could say, oh, is it failure? I don't know. All I'm doing is I'm taking feedback from the behavior I'm engaging in and looking at, is this a positive or negative? We want to just keep honing in on the positive. And over the course of a life, we end up creating a really, really good life because of all the micro failures.
Awesome. Well, that's everything.
Sweet. Well, thank you.
Thank you.